Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show with your host, Phil Tarrant.
G'day guys and welcome to the show. My name is Russell Stephenson. I'm stepping in for Phil Tarrant as he's currently overseas. I have a guest with me in the studio today who has been on the podcast fairly recently, but I wanted to have another chat with her and really pick her brains in a few different areas of property that wasn't discussed in the first podcast. So the name Katarina Taurian may well ring some bells with you guys. Now, just a quick recap, Kat purchased her first property back in 2016 and is now a successful rent investor. So Kat, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, and thanks for calling me successful, Russell.
Well, let's find that out. So just to recap, you bought back in 2016. You lived in the property for how long?
About a year.
Okay, and the property's based in New South Wales?
Correct, yeah.
Far from where you live?
No, I did that classic first home buyer thing where it was about 20 minutes from where I essentially spent my teenage years. So it was a very familiar purchase.
So how far is that now from where you live, rent?
About 45 minutes by public transport and in kilometres, about 20 kilometres.
Okay.
Drive time, yeah.
And tenanted?
Yes, tenanted. Great tenants.
Any issues within the first couple of years in terms of filling gaps with no tenants, boilers blowing up, or has it been a fairly safe purchase? Or
fairly safe purchase, actually. As you can imagine, Russell, I was pretty pedantic about making sure that the property was in good condition. May have a little bit of a reputation for being a bit of a perfectionist.
Yes.
It's a yes, and he's smiling as he says that. So it was in a 60s block, which meant that parts of it were in original condition, but a lot of the appliances had been replaced over the years, which was a good plus for me. I did replace a few things like bathroom vanities, which were original condition, if you can believe it. Okay. So possibly some asbestos in there, or God knows. But yeah, in general, pretty rock solid. So you
replaced that stuff before you moved in, or when you left and then the tenants were going to move in?
I did all that while I was in there.
Okay.
I got pretty keen with the DIY. Did a fair bit myself, left the plumbing to the experts, although I did venture into a bit of YouTube territory with trying to teach myself, but quickly ventured out.
You know what, I did a podcast with somebody on the SPR show many months ago, and he said, look, the amount of money you can save by searching around, Googling and doing some of the repairs yourself can save a considerable amount of money. I mean, look, when it comes to, being certified gas or electrician, maybe, as you say, leave it to professionals. But again, still a good strategy to save.
Oh, definitely. Well, I regraded my own shower and I didn't even know that was a thing that you could do without certification because of all the waterproofing and everything. But stuff like that is really quite easy. And I became quite well known at my local Bunnings. So had some building advisors there.
Still the same tenants for the last couple of years?
Yes, that's same good. Tenants, and they're excellent actually.
And rent is, obviously you've gone over that 12-month period. Did you maintain your rent level, or have you increased on your tenants? Has that been a consideration?
No, so the rent has stayed the same, but I'm very happy with it.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's certainly the tenants are great. Very, very pleased with them, and it was important for me to be even involved in the tenant selection. I do have property manager, but making sure that they're all quality tenants. So given that I'm happy with the rent that they're paying and I'm super happy with them, look, I'm in no rush to be demanding.
I think that's a really good point, an important point. I've been in a similar situation with one of my properties where I've had it rented out and the agent has recommended, look, put it up by another $30 a week. And it's kind of, we'll give it a go. And again, it was empty for a couple of weeks. And then the nerves started settling and I dropped it straight down and got somebody in straight away.
Yeah.
It's quite easy to come round and, the 12-month cycle goes around and it's that, right, increase the rent, make some more money. And I think if you've got some good tenants and they are comfortable, safe, looking after the property, you get good rental reports from your management agent, why mess around too much unless it's just they are underpaying market value?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the only point that I would really start to worry if I had a quality tenant. If the market value started to exceed what they were paying, then I might reconsider. But like you just said, if the property then becomes vacant for quite a while and you're missing out on the rental income that you would have otherwise had, it's really a false economy. You might feel a little bit better that you're getting market value, and certainly in the long term that pays off. But forcing great tenants out just because they're not going to up their rent by $10 a week, doesn't really work.
Yeah, on the flip side, I've got some friends that have been renting their place for about 6 years, and they're still paying pretty much the same rent from what they were 6 years ago, and the owner can probably get a significant amount more, but they're there, they look after it, they pay month in, month out, without fail, don't rock the boat.
Yeah.
So again, it's just that balance. Depends on again, your own personal circumstances and situations.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, look, anyway, interesting point.
It
Look,
is.
Kat, the first podcast when you were on the SPI show really talked about advice for first home buyers. It was talking about building a professional team and how you can lean on people and leverage those relationships and making sure you've got the right people around you to make the best decisions possible at any given point. So I don't want to go back over old ground, but there's something you mentioned in that first podcast was, and I'd like to dig a bit deeper around, you mentioned around build quality. It's important to make sure build quality is up to your standards, up to scratch. And when you talk about build quality, what I want to bury down into is what does that mean to you and how can you make sure that build quality, regardless of whether you're buying new, buying old, and obviously your first property was in the 1960s?
60s block, yep.
Yep, not bought in the 1960s.
No.
Just to be clear.
Thanks, Ross. I'm only 30, but all right then.
So talk me through what build quality means to you and what you meant by that on that first episode.
Okay. So my budget was only ever going to allow, if I was certainly buying in New South Wales, was only ever going to allow to buy a unit. So two things are really important to me. The unit itself being in good condition and not being sort of up for repairs within the next 10 years, and really never having any structural reparation considerations at all. And then the second major consideration, which I think is really skated over, especially in the conveyancing process, was the quality of the entire building. So what a conveyancer will often, or what I found, I should say, is that a lot of conveyancers that I was sort of speaking to when I was deciding on who to go with, they were like, you don't have to worry about building reports for the entire building because you only own the paint in. And that's correct, right? Your primary focus should be on the property. Yeah,
it's an odd sort of position. Even you saying that sounds, well, hang on, that's fine, but...
Yeah.
It's
a legal argument, right? And that's true. What they're saying is correct. In terms of what you own and the legal side of it, it doesn't matter what's happening outside your property because you're not liable for it in the same way that you are your own and you don't own it. But, I mean, if you're buying on the top floor, and I did buy on the top floor, and the roof breaks, and our roof did break in a way, or it needs repairs, didn't break, then that's a problem.
Yeah.
If I've got water coming into my apartment, that's a problem. If the building is gross, that's a problem.
Yeah.
If it's sinking,
the subsidence, and you've all got to club in together and make a decision and sort that stuff out. So absolutely, it's critical. It's kind of saying, well, I've got this unit within this block, and it doesn't matter what's happening outside, everything else falls around, but mine's still standing, so it's okay. Well, it's not.
It's really not okay. I can assure you, when you're on the top floor, you really need some units beneath you to keep things okay.
So how do you tick the boxes for build quality?
Okay, many things, Russ.
I know. Here we go.
Put your seatbelt on. For an established block, what I did, because there's generally a 60s red brick in Sydney, in the southern suburbs of Sydney where I bought, you're really buying something that is brick, is double brick, it's pretty heavy, it's almost like a bit of a bunker. So just the optics of it are pretty good. You know that it's not the kind of building that's going to fall down, but the build quality considerations are things like, has there been water seeping into the building over the years? That's something that appears over time. Particularly, I found that a lot of the ground floor units that I was inspecting, because shower trays had failed in the units above, that they had a lot of water damage going down the walls in certain shared certain communal walls.
Is this something that you, as you were walking around, you picked up, or you had somebody with you that picked up and pointed these things out? How did that come about?
Column A and column B, one thing I'm really lucky with is that I've got my entire family is kind of in building and carpentry and architecture and all those sort of things. So I kind of grew up around it. Also was pretty well researched. Went to some inspections with actually a toolkit, was borderline going to buy a dampness meter. But I think all of those things...
None of this surprises me.
No, it shouldn't. None of it should surprise you at all. I have a compass that you can...
But it's good. I mean, look, if I'm sat there and I'm considering buying my first property and trying to get over different hurdles and mindsets and barriers and not quite sure, the things that you've done and the things that you could put in place, it's great advice for people listening anyway. So...
Yeah. And also, it wasn't just sort of, oh my gosh, I'm playing to my personality. it was a cost saving for me as well. I thought I bought in the peak of the Sydney boom for under market value, I might just add. You did say successful. At that time in Sydney, you really had to quickly, and before you'd even signed a contract, decide that I'm buying this property, and you had to be willing to forfeit cooling off periods and all of that sort of stuff. So I had to, it's like either you work out yourself how to be sure of a building, or you just keep paying professionals to sort it out for you, like by way of building report or something like that. And after inspecting a few and realising how competitive it was, I was like, I've got to teach myself this. I've got to get myself to the point of 90% instead of constantly calling all these people to be like, I've got to get this one and I've got to get it quickly.
Yeah.
So, I did just kind of learn a lot of things in established blocks to look out for, water being a big one. And water you can smell as soon as you walk into a place. If you're walking into a foyer and it's damp, there's a water problem somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Also,
so would you scrub that off then? As soon as you walk in, you smell that and you go, oh, yeah, that's me kind of almost turning around and disappearing.
So in my current block, there was an issue with rising damp in one of the lobby areas. So there's 2 entrances to the lobby. And if I got a building inspector to have a look at that when I knew that I was basically 97% sure I was going to get it, and he confirmed that it wasn't structural. If it was coming from the roof and had gone all the way down the building over 50 years, no, that would have turned me off.
Yeah.
That's going to be at some point something we're going to have to fix that. And I'm not going to be able to afford it.
You mentioned self-taught or you learn along the way, and obviously having family that's in the industry and around building and property certainly helps. Is there any other areas where you sort of picked up or learnt, or was it sort of going around with these professionals and just asking questions and kind of digging a bit deeper with them?
With established blocks only?
Oh, just generally. You know, you say obviously I'd be self-taught. If you're self-taught 90%, how do you become self-taught is the question.
Oh, okay. So I did a lot of reading. I listened to the SPI show, and that's
thank you.
that's not a false plug. I genuinely did, because you just want to hear from people who have done it, right? And that was a really, really helpful resource for me. And there's a lot of free information available on fair trading as well, just kind of checklists to look out for, because they deal with all the complaints, right? So they kind of know these are a few of the problem areas that you need to be looking at, and just generally asking. You ring a building inspector and just ask a few things, as long as you're not just taking the mickey out of them and you're never going to use their services. They're pretty helpful, I find, if they know that they're going to convert. And they did with me. Yeah. And I've used them several times since. So
yeah, I think it's important. You see those people that walk around properties and the people that know what they're looking at. There's sort of key sort of indicators. You can go, okay, that's a concern. The shape of that crack, or this thing here, or that there. For people to look out. Other people kind of pretend they know what they're doing and they tap the wall and I don't know what I'm really listening for, but it sounds like I know what I'm doing. So I think actually upskilling and being able to walk around the whole block, if you're looking at a block or obviously sort of freestanding home, being able to identify sort of key areas and reading and learning and making sure that the build quality is up to scratch, is key.
Yeah, and actually, just on that point, so it can work in the reverse as well, where if you see something that looks like a major fault, which turns a lot of people off, and then you've got the kind of smarts to know that it's not a major fault, that can be really helpful as well. And it was in my apartment that I ended up buying. So it's a very compartmentalized apartment because it's the 60s. Everything's its own room. So the kitchen is its own room. You go into this room after all the other rooms are being perfectly fine, and the ceiling had caved in the kitchen. And you walk in and you see that, and that is that's quite off-putting, right? But I looked at that and I thought, well, I think that's just a plasterboard ceiling. I can't see any problems in any of the other rooms, and I can see that the light fittings aren't the original light. So one of the tenants is just like bolted on this like coffin-sized light to the ceiling, and it's made the plasterboard crack. Yeah. So just had a real think about it and looked at it, and I thought, well, it's clearly not an asbestos ceiling or anything like that. So I just rang around a bit to ask, and it turns out that's actually a really common thing, especially with properties that have been tenanted for ages, just like fittings that shouldn't be there. And that compromise the non-structural components of the apartment. So when I got sort of to the point of 97% confident, I said to the building inspector, can you just see if this is a structural thing? And he, even just looking at it, he was like, no. And then he went into the roof and inspected, and he said, no, the tenants have just played silly buggers here and put up a light that they shouldn't have, and they've made the ceiling cave.
Yeah.
And that was great for me because that knocked out a really good chunk of the competition who don't want to buy an apartment with a cave ceiling, and that's a fair call.
Yeah, yeah.
But I just got to paint it to fix it, and it cost me $500.
And that's it. I think to be able to see past some of those, what would appear to be larger issues, can be quite cosmetic, and a lot of people will walk in and go, no, absolutely not for me, and they will disappear. And that's where the opportunity lies as well. Yeah. But making sure that, yes, you have done your homework, your background, and you understand that it's not going to be a small repair that turns into a massive problem. So, but yeah, look, normally it's the ugly duckling that you can kind of see and go, actually, you know what, with a couple of minor changes, that's where you can really score a great bargain in the market.
Definitely.
It's kind of ironic, obviously, talking about build quality, given just recent sort of happenings in Sydney around the Opal Tower. Now, for those guys that I'm sure a lot of you would already know, but for people that are unsure, the Opal Tower is a huge development out near Sydney Olympic Park. Is that right?
Yeah, it is.
So it was towards the end of December where some large cracking was heard, and they evacuated a lot of homeowners and no doubt tenants and obviously informed landlords that there's a problem within the building. So, I guess it's tough. You're buying a new build property there, and you assume that the build quality is going to be there. It's brand new, and you'd hope that they're reputable builders. But again, there's going to be areas like that where it's going to be almost impossible for you to really be able to pick that as well. Is that a fair? What's your thoughts around that kind of situation there?
Yeah, I think it's a really fair assumption, especially if you're buying in Australia, that if you're buying new, it's at its peak, right? Yeah. And traditionally, the thinking is being that you almost have to be careful that you're not buying at its absolute peak, because it might be a bit inflated and go down from there. But that kind of logic doesn't really apply if the build quality isn't there in the first place.
Yeah. It's a tough one.
It is.
So I guess, look, sort of coming back up to speed into 2019 now, it's been a couple of years since you purchased your first property. You're renting at the moment. What's sort of the plans, given the current market condition, and a lot of people say, look, house prices are softening across the country, some quicker in different areas. This is the opportunity where, people are, being able to pick up a bargain. Mm-hmm. Is that your mindset? What are you thinking personally and market conditions?
Absolutely. I'm really happy that the market is softening. I'm not ready to purchase another at this point, but I certainly am looking within the next 3 probably to 5 years, and I'm really pleased that the market is going through a point where I won't be racing people that are willing to wave a 66W around at an auction in New South Wales. I think as much as holding a property that I bought in 2016, you want to see its capital growth going in the right direction.
Has that happened with the one? Like at the moment, is there much capital growth? And I guess my thought process is, if there's been capital growth and now property prices are coming back, how much of a concern? It's good for you. You said that it's good for you that house prices are softening, but at the same time, you still own a property. So how does that, would you look to leverage, would you go, no, it's set and forget, I'm not going to touch that property for the next 10 years and that's just a safety net for you? Or would you be looking to leverage that property so therefore you do sort of want to see the capital growth?
It was always a long-term plan for me. So if this was a really aggressive acquisition phase for me, like I was going to buy one a year, then I'd probably be pretty concerned. But equally, I was very much of the logic that you make your money when you buy, so you buy below market value, unless you're buying owner-occupy, which is, there's a lot of different considerations there. But as an investment, I was always going to buy below market value. And even though it was tempting for some of the properties that I wanted to just get it done, particularly in 2016, I thought, this market is going to slow down at some point, and it's probably going to slow down at some point soon. So if I'm not buying well below a market average or the median for this suburb at this point, then I'm really compromising the equity that I can build. So can't even remember your original question, Russ. But
so let's say perfect world, you're ready to go again now.
Yeah.
Would you still stick with that sort of circa 60s solid double brick kind of purchase? Would you be looking for freestanding homes now? What would you be looking for?
I'd really like a freestanding home, because I don't like neighbours, if I'm honest. That's been
You don't have to live in it.
That's one of the, I know, but you still have to deal with everyone.
As part of the strata, the whole sort of block has got to vote and all that stuff. You've still got to interact. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm not very personable is what I'm saying. I would actually just like to have some land as well. And I think the point of difference for me in a few years is that I will have property behind me that I can leverage. The market will be low, so the properties that I couldn't afford, like a freestanding home, like actual land in New South Wales, will be at a good or a better at least buying rate. So it's kind of like just hold your nerve and stick to your strategy. And I think if I didn't have that strategy laid out in the beginning, if I was just like, I'll just buy a property that I can afford and see how I go, that this market would be making me really, really nervous. But I did know at the beginning, you're buying in a boom, got to buy low. Otherwise, the idea of buying another property in 5 years or so will be really, really compromised by what the market's doing. And you never want to be totally controlled by those variables, right?
Yeah.
And then, I really wanted a buy and hold strategy.
And what was the purpose of that? Why did you buy a property? What was and what's the end goal, I guess? Is it a case of, yes, I want to get, a portfolio of 5, I want to stretch myself and try and get 10. What's the purpose? What's the long term?
So for me, I just wanted, I, as you know, Russ, am a journalist, and I write a lot about finance, and the key to finance and to wealth creation is not so much how much you earn, but it's a lot of it is the diversity of your investments. And I thought, a lot of what I'm doing is just saving my money, and I don't have any other income stream outside of what I'm earning. And I earn just fine. It's not like that's a problem, but that's all my eggs in one basket. So when I was looking at realistically how I could build some wealth and have something that creates income for me that has been tried and tested, because as you know, I like reliable, but property is a really good answer to that. And I don't want to stretch myself, to your other point. If given that my aim, which is for me was really important to work out, my aim is just to get some additional income and to have some, something behind me that can make me some money one day. I don't need to have 10 properties or 12 or 15.
Yeah.
That's a really good strategy for some.
And it is a good strategy.
I don't need it. It's not my goal.
And I think that's another good and valid point is when you sort of get into property and you talk to other people, it's almost this kind of, well, how many are you going to get? The more the better. And I need to get 10 over the next 10 years. You've got your foot on the ladder. You have your investment property. You're renting at the moment. Like I say, maybe you pick up another 1 or 2 over the next sort of 3, 5, 10 years. But it doesn't have to be once you sort of set that first property in motion, I've then got to require 10 as quick as possible.
No.
And I think sometimes there is that panic around quick, get now. So I think it's a good valid point.
Yeah, I think the panic can really set in as well if you just don't know. If you don't know from the very beginning what you want to do, and I've seen that a lot with a lot of my friends as well. Even when you're buying, if you don't have a set budget, you can get so tempted. Yeah. And when everyone's running out, it can be really tempting to run out with them. And equally, when everyone's running in, it can be really tempting. So it's just like, so many buyer's agents say to you, if it's 1 cent over what you want and it's an investment, move on.
That's it.
It's too expensive.
Yeah. It's
too expensive. Look, I'm really pleased with my decision so far. And 2 years on, I'm happy with the position of it. It has increased in market value, even though the market is sliding. Yeah. But a lot of that is because I did buy well below market value as well.
Excellent.
That
sounds really good.
Yeah.
Look, Kat, thanks for coming on. I mean, I'm going to obviously take great interest in sort of what you do next with your property portfolio and how that sort of evolves and what happens to your first and where you go to from here. As I said, look, there's other areas that, we can dig deeper on from that first podcast that you mentioned and no doubt obviously extend, some of the conversation here today. So without doubt, we'll get you back on the show. But once again, thank you for coming on.
Can't keep me away. Thanks so much, Russell.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us today, guys. Look, make sure you check out our other podcasts. There are literally hundreds of them to choose from, all jam-packed with some great insights, tips and strategies, obviously designed designed to help you guys in your search for property. Make sure you stay ahead of the pack and follow us for all the latest news and information on our social channels, Facebook, LinkedIn and Twitter. And obviously, if you've got any questions or if you'd like to come on the show, please email editor@smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. Hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks for your time.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.